So how much time have you spent this offseason thinking about NFL kickoffs? Well, today we're going to dive into the subject head first. Shawn Syed of Sumer Sports, an AI-driven football analytics site, undertook a massive project where he went back to the XFL season in 2023 and looked at the new kickoff rule that the NFL adopted this year. They actually took from the XFL in changing this rule, a play that the NFL had essentially tried to eliminate over the last few years because of fear of injury. There are some subtle differences between the rule that they've adopted and what the XFL did. But Shawn went back and charted every single kickoff that season to try and identify some trends in how teams approached the rule, both from a receiving standpoint, from a kicking strategical standpoint, even personnel usage and potentially roster construction, and what we might look forward to seeing in the league and here in Seattle moving ahead into the season. We're talking kickoffs today as we get closer to training camp. This is Seahawks Forever. I'm Dan. Let's go.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
Before we get into today's discussion, we do have some news. The Seahawks made their declarations this week for the PUP list, physically unable to perform, and the NFI list, the non-football injury list, initially placing 12 players combined on those two lists. Now, the difference there, just to catch you up, is the PUP list are players that were injured during the course of official football activities. NFI is just how it sounds, that players got injured most likely and most commonly working out on their own away from the facility, outside of the eyes of the organization. Famously, sometimes over the years, some of those injuries happen with players doing things they're contractually prohibited from doing, but most of the cases it's an ankle sprain or it's a hamstring pull. At least we hope so, because there are some surprises on these lists. Of course, the usual suspects. We expected Abe Lucas, even though Corbin Smith came on the show a couple weeks ago, said he doesn't anticipate that Abe will have to start the season on the PUP list. It does make sense that he starts the preseason or the training camp portion of the season on the PUP list. Terrell Dodson, Jerome Baker, who presumably will be the two starting inside linebackers, both offseason acquisitions of the Seahawks, starting on the PUP list. And then there are some surprises. Both of the Auburn rookie cornerbacks drafted this year, DJ James, Nehemiah Pritchett, on the NFI list, and then some other cursory players and backups. A couple of things to keep in mind, because it was pretty jarring to see these lists come out initially. Player can be activated at any time. He comes in tomorrow, he feels better, he passes his physical, he's good to go. And we've already had one instance of that. D. Williams, the undrafted free agent receiver out of Tennessee, who the Seahawks signed presumably for his return acumen, something we're going to get into today. He was activated just a couple of days ago. He came in, they put him on the list, he came in, passed his physical, he's good to go. I anticipate that will happen with a number of these players. Now, obviously, all eyes next week as veterans report on Wednesday will be on those linebackers, Dodson and Baker. Neither of them participated in any of the on-field workouts throughout the offseason, and it's certainly a source of concern, given that the Seahawks moved on from Bobby Wagner and Jordan Brooks this offseason, brought in Baker and Dodson to man the inside of that linebacker core. So, are we talking about the Seahawks potentially looking for other players? Maybe. I don't think we're going to see that now. I think we'll know more a week from now, 5 days from now, when veterans do report, and it'll be an evolving situation. Tomorrow, I'm going to go live. We'll get into this a little bit deeper. I'm going to take your questions and comments. Look for that around 5 or 6 o'clock Pacific time tomorrow. Follow me on Twitter at Seahawks Forever until then, so that you know exactly when we're going to go live. Bryce Coots is going to join me at a point in the show from the Hawks Own Rundown podcast. We're going to talk about this, and the injury thing is part of it. We're going to get into that and maybe go through the free agent list, see some names that are still available, maybe some players that can come in and help in the event that they get to full squad workouts next week. And some of these players, particularly Baker and Dodson, aren't ready to go. But today we're going to talk about the kickoff rule and how teams might approach this from both a receiving and a kicking standpoint, how they might approach it personnel-wise. We'll get into it. We talked about some teams that have stated on the record that they might be a little more conservative in their approach. I don't really anticipate the Seahawks being one of those teams. And part of the reason might be some of the personnel moves they made this offseason. Williams was given one of the largest, I think the largest guaranteed undrafted free agent deal this offseason because of his return ability. They just signed another player this week, Marcus Sims, who during his career at West Virginia as a wide receiver, was a very good kickoff returner, also did that for the Michigan Panthers in the USFL and the UFL. He's not a guy that's going to challenge to be one of the 5 or 6 wide receivers that the Seahawks keep going into the season. So another example, the Seahawks may be leaning into the idea of bringing in some dynamic players that might end up helping them on the return side. Before we get into that, and I do have a disclaimer before we start this interview, but hit that like button, subscribe to the YouTube video, hit the bell for notification of future episodes, and all the other ways that you can support the show. I will have those descriptions and the links down below in the YouTube description so that you can support me if you like what I do. Now, before we get into this interview, and Shawn was terrific and really enjoyed talking with him. You're going to enjoy this interview. He is very dynamic, very passionate about this subject and about NFL analytics as a whole. There was an issue with the recording of the video at the beginning of this interview. For the first 7 or 8 minutes, I believe, you will see some graphics. You will not see the actual video that was taken. You will get the high quality audio feed. And then about halfway through the interview, if you're watching on YouTube, the video then kicks in and we finish out properly. I apologize for that, but I assure you this is an interview worth checking out because I get excited when I talk to people who are excited about what they do. Players, coaches, reporters, and this may be one of the favorite interviews I've done this offseason because of the passion and because of the intelligence and the way he went about approaching this. And he has a very fascinating background. We start with that. So here is Shawn Syed and the conversation we had today about the NFL's new kickoff rule. Enjoy. Joining me now, as promised, Shawn Syed of Sumer Sports. Shawn, thank you for taking the time to join me. I am interested, and I know my viewers will be too, about the path you took to doing the work that you're doing now. A law degree, you were a practicing attorney for a number of years, now writing about football. How did you arrive at the intersection of those two worlds?
Dan, I feel like every day is just a lucky day. I grew up playing football, always loving the game, just drawing up the little plays on note cards and playing in the backyard with my 2 older brothers. And I mean, they'll tell you I was always losing. I'll tell you that maybe I won here and there, but was very lucky to go through law school and practice law for a few years. And during that time, I was writing football articles on the side, just trying to learn as much as I can and continue to fall in love with the game that I love so much, and was lucky enough to write about the Vikings for SB Nation for that crazy season where they had the insane comeback against the Bills. And then feel like I lucked into this job at Sumer Sports. My title is Director of Communications and working at a company that's really dedicated to help moving teams into the next era of advanced analytics and AI data and computer vision, and still maintaining my ability to make sure that teams and people are informed of how important the kind of hardcore X's and O's are when doing some of that work.
Tell me a little bit more about the mission of Sumer Sports. On a day-to-day basis, what are some of the things you intend to accomplish there?
Yeah, I think it's really about helping teams use all this data. Like, we've moved into an era now. I mean, the Seahawks, particularly with Mike McDonald, I know that they're rebuilding a lot of their data stuff in-house. So how can teams that have all of this new data, you have tracking data, you have better analytics. Now, how can you actually use that to evaluate players, to decide what players in free agency, maybe this player is a hidden gem, or maybe this player is really, really specifically a scheme fit for you. The players for Mike McDonald defense are going to look a little bit different than the players for Pete Carroll's defense. So doing things like that really to just help teams win. I think at the end of the day, that's what everyone wants. And I think that's a tangible difference that certainly, Sumer, I think that we can make. I think that we have made it in a few ways, and I think hopefully we'll continue to make.
And I feel like that can be applied possibly to what we're about to talk about here, maybe more than any other aspect of what football teams are doing this offseason in particular because of how it may impact personnel decisions, roster construction. This new kickoff rule, first of all, it fascinates me simply for the fact that, just a few years ago, the NFL was basically trying to get rid of the kickoff as a play. The safety concerns were cited. They were trying to minimize high impact, high speed collisions. And then the results of that ended up being that entire aspect of the game was removed. And people were even calling, myself included. I got to a point last year where I came out and said, just get rid of the play. Just start on the 25-yard line and we'll just go from there, right? I was still doing that. I'm sorry, Dan. No, I was just it shifted quickly, almost overnight, that the NFL recognized they want it to be a play again. What brought you to want to dive into this deeper and take a look at how this new rule might impact the game, and take the look that you did at the XFL and what they did 2 years ago?
It is so rare that we get something like handed to us by the NFL. The owners voted on this, but really, the whole competition committee as a whole, something that gives us an actual change on Sundays. It's really, really rare. So that was pretty exciting when I first thought about it. And I thought, this is going to be crazy. Where like my 5-minute break after a touchdown, now it's gone. I can't get on my phone or go to the bathroom or refill my water bottle a little bit, because now I got to sit and watch this. And then I think after watching 407 of these, I maybe got a little bit crazier, but maybe fell in love with them a little bit. So it's just so cool to me. Like it could end up being a minor thing. I kind of think it will be maybe not a fully major thing, but I do think it's going to be a big deal. And we're going to be able to see now that special teams coordinators a lot of times are not in the spotlight. And I think we're going to be able to see that kind of differentiation between a special teams coordinator who's really, really creative and doing something wild, and someone that is, maybe behind the 8 ball just a little bit.
So what you did, you went back to the 2023 XFL season before the XFL and the USFL merged into the UFL this year. And as you mentioned, the number 407 you cite is the actual number of total kickoffs for that entire season. You charted every single one. And I'll put the links to the piece in the description, and that includes a link to the spreadsheet for those nerds out there that really want to get into it and look at every single play that you charted. Now, you mentioned it might be nothing. Just last week, Daniel Jeremiah on his podcast came out and said he's been told by certain special teams coaches in the league, and he estimates it might be as many as a third of coaches in the league have the mindset today as we sit here of, we're just going to kick it out of the end zone, let teams take it on the 30, don't want to take any risks. The XFL was more of a risk-taking league. Did you see any of that approach as we begin this conversation?
I did not see that approach because the rules really, really prohibited it. And, it was like essentially punitive if you were kind of taking that mindset. And hearing that quote, I guess it makes me think of, a third of the league, it feels like they're maybe not doing everything that they can to win, if that's their thought. I will say that there might be credence to the thought of, let's just give the ball. Now it will be on the 30-yard line, which is every yard increases the chances that a team is able to score any sort of point on a drive. So those yards, it out loud, it's just 5 yards. I want to harp on those yards do really matter, and where a team starts does really, really matter. So in the XFL, there were so many kick returns. It was such a high rate of return. And I certainly think, at least in the preseason, we'll see teams that are probably not going to show off their strategies. But Dan, I've seen an NFL kicker use some of these strategies that we'll talk about later, and it is beautiful and it is ugly at the same time for the return team. So I think, not just because now I feel like I'm personally invested in the excitement of the kickoff. If no one kicked off in a fun way all year, I'm fine. I'm happy with the work that was done. It was explorative. If it doesn't come to anything, that's fine. But there's an edge there. And in a game that it is such a razor thin margin every single Sunday, if you're not trying just a little bit to exploit that, it almost hurts a little bit to hear that.
Now, essentially, and again, you've embedded video and different examples in the piece, so I highly encourage everyone to go look at that, including the NFL's official video where it kind of breaks all this down in animated form and shows the landing zones. But essentially, both teams line up almost facing each other across the line of scrimmage on the receiving team's side of the 50-yard line. Nobody can move until the ball hits the ground or is caught in the landing zone between the goal line and the 20-yard line. The kicker can't even advance until the ball hits the ground or is caught. And then it's almost like a play from scrimmage, right? Is that what it kind of, when you started charting this, that's the first thing that stands out to me. It's almost like you're putting in motion a play that ultimately looks like a play from scrimmage when the ball's being snapped.
I think that's the exact right way to think about it. And to me, the XFL, they try this strategy out across junior colleges for years and years and years to get research and figure out a way to, well, how do we literally make a kickoff feel more like a scrimmage play? It reduced the risk of injury by a lot, but I will say there were a lot of big hits in the XFL, and I feel like we are going to see that at some points in the NFL, maybe to the NFL chagrin, just a little bit. But when I looked at it, and it felt like that teams were treating it like a run play, and I think that that's how NFL teams probably should and probably will treat it. Not only just because that's what it looks like, but that's what it feels like in terms of, well, how do you block it? What specific players are maybe good or maybe a little bit less good at this? But yeah, that image that we get of at the Super Bowl of all the cameras flashing where the kicker is running up with 10 players on between both sides, that image is gone. And now at the Super Bowl, it's going to be a kicker standing by himself, just kind of booting that ball up in the air. So it might look a little weird. It will look a little weird at first because it still looks a little weird to me. But I think after enough kickoffs and learning these kind of weird niche rules that happen on the side every once in a while, I think that people will probably end up liking it.
Before we get into some of the specific strategies on the return and the kicking side, just kind of brief everybody on the potential outcomes, the way the rule works as far as fair catches, if the ball hits the ground prior to the goal line, bounces in, those types of things at the very beginning of the play.
Yep. So as you said, the landing zone from the goal line to the 20-yard line on the receiving team's side. So if a ball is either short of the landing zone or out of bounds before the goal line, the ball is going to get placed at the receiving team's 40-yard line, which like in the NFL, I mean, that almost guarantees like a field goal after a few plays. So that is like a big deal. It is a big incentive. I think if you're having those plays happen often, that's going to be a problem. But if a ball does land in the landing zone, the ball has to be returned. There are no fair catches. And do I love, essentially mandating to a player, hey, you are not allowed to fair catch? Like, I don't love that, but that is certainly going to lead to more returns. And we'll talk about strategies more that I feel like are going to force teams to return it. And then a ball that if you just kick it straight through the back of the end zone, as you said, or even a ball that bounces inside that landing zone and then goes through the back of the end zone, that's going to be placed at the receiving team's 30-yard line. And then overall, the onside kick is just dead. It's or the surprise onside kick is certainly dead, but the onside kick, it's only going to be allowed in the fourth quarter, and the trailing team has to declare it. So, I've thought about, it's like, oh, well, what if you're like a leading team and you want to declare an onside kick and then you can squib it and try and like fudge the rules sort of in that way, trying to use some of the skills I learned as a lawyer just a little bit, but that's not there. That's not in the rules. So it'll be interesting to see, over time. I think that in the XFL, there was like homogeneity a little bit just because the rules had they really, really forced it into a certain area. And so it'll be interesting to see, with the NFL rules maybe being a little bit less punitive in certain ways and really punishing kickers maybe a little bit less if they're outside of that landing zone. Like, for example, in the XFL, the ball was on like the kicking team's 45, which is wild if the ball was short of the landing zone or out of bounds, which that's it's a 15-yard difference from what it'll be in the NFL. So a lot of rules, a lot of weird little things, but I think that landing zone area, it ends up being intuitive over time. It's not initially, but I feel like I can promise people in saying like, have an open mind, have an open heart. You'll see a few and it'll start to make sense pretty quick.
Now, one difference between the XFL rule and the NFL rule, the XFL had to have 10 players up on that lineup, and so only one returner. The NFL has the option of dropping 2 returners. Do you think that will be the most common approach? What are your thoughts on that rule difference?
Yeah, I certainly think that is going to be the most common approach, just because to me, the biggest rule difference is actually in the XFL. If the ball landed in the landing zone on the ground in front of a returner, the kicking team actually couldn't take off until I think the ball was on the ground for at least 3 seconds. So it was kind of, funny to watch it sometimes where you have these guys who are like extreme athletes, like trying to hold just like a touch before they leave. But in the NFL, the ball is live the second it hits the landing zone, which to me is insanity. And I think something that I keep mentioning this, like just want to float the word knuckleball out there before we get to it, because it's an important thing to think about. But so once that ball lands in the landing zone inside that 20-yard line, the kickoff team is off. So there is a huge incentive for the return team to really pick that ball up quick. So, I mean, from what I've heard out of camp so far, it's been pretty common that you have 2 returners back there to start. And I think that's a response to what the kicking team is probably going to do.
Is that going to encourage maybe some teams to squib kick? In essence, yeah.
Dan, if I don't see the knuckleball kick, I'm really gonna be almost heartbroken, because look, I think NFL kickers are very good at what they do in terms of like controlling a football. Obviously, these guys miss field goals. I know every team is probably mad at their kicker just a little bit, and these guys get paid to make those big kicks. But if you're an NFL kicker, particularly if you're like a fringe NFL kicker, maybe on the edge of a roster or something like that, I know teams aren't carrying like 15 kickers or anything. But if you can perfect this knuckleball kick where it's a low line drive, it's a weird shape, it's obviously not a circle, like it's unpredictable where this ball is going to bounce. If it hits around that 18-yard line, keeps on bouncing kind of weird. Now the returner has to become a shortstop. Can they field the ball? It's because the ball doesn't start, or the play doesn't start once they touch the ball. The play starts once that ball hits the ground, and that space is now compressed a little bit. The athletes in the NFL are incredible, and those kickoff guys are going to be able to get on the returners really, really fast. So now if the returner is grabbing the ball at like the 8, if they bobble it just a bit, they have to look down. They have their eyes off of the kick coverage unit. Now they're in a real tough spot. So to me, if you're not practicing the knuckleball, it's not a disservice to the labor that I did on my eyes watching all these kickoffs. That's like the edge I think that the kickoff teams have to be taken. And again, I've seen an NFL kicker do it. It is sickening in both ways, in the most positive way that it's like super cool manipulating a rule, and then bad on the opposite end where like, I don't know how some of these returners are going to be able to deal with this.
Now, you were able to identify a number of different approaches that teams took on the receiving side in how they block this thing. The first one obviously being just hat on a hat, man up, kind of vanilla, almost a basketball sort of screen situation, trying to open some cutback lanes. Another technique that you call drop, where the receiving team drops slightly, almost like linebackers dropping into coverage, sort of looking almost the way an offensive line slides to one side or the other, and the way that they manipulate their protection. And then as we've equated it to a scrimmage play, some pulling and trapping and things like that, just trying to isolate a certain blocker and create a hole. What was the most common approach that you saw in your charting?
So the most common way, and I think it makes sense, it was just the most vanilla way, where you're literally just having your return players just turn around and block a player across from them. Now, in the XFL, all 10 players on the return team had to be on that same line, right, just 5 yards across from the kickoff team. In the NFL, 2 players outside the hashes are going to be allowed to be off the line within a 5-yard range. So that opens up a little bit, because when our teams are, for example, having an outside player going back to the inside, and what I listed as trap, like trapping a player in that way, sometimes they were just too slow. But now in the NFL, you're going to have an advantage where a player's off the line, they can have a better angle. So while the most common way was absolutely just, vanilla ice cream, and for the record, Dan, nothing wrong with vanilla ice cream, but like just turning around and blocking that player, I think in the NFL, you're probably going to see maybe more frequent differences early on, just because like that block is really, really hard to just turn around and someone is full speed running at you 5 yards. You're kind of like on your heels a little bit shuffling. Like it doesn't look pretty all the time because of how hard it is. So I think that a team has to be able to do something different to try and manipulate it in a little bit of a way. And really, like you see a guard pulling on a run play, we're going to see these guys pulling on return plays as well.
And then what was the most unique approach that you saw a team use?
So they were teams that would it was a full run play. Like I charted it as power because literally, I mean, you think of power on the offensive line, you kind of get a double team at the point of attack and then a guard from the backside pulling through. So a team literally did that, which was kind of fun to see, because it was only like 3 times I think that I had seen it. But to me, it was like, all right, well, they're really kind of digging deep. And I think with even better athletes in the NFL, maybe teams kind of dig further into that. There was a reverse. There was like a throwback where a guy's running to the right. He throws it all the way across to the left. And I thought initially, I was like, I think maybe reverses will be a little bit fun, but you got to run a long way from that line to have that reverse happen and be successful. So even on that crazy trick play, it wasn't, it was like an 18-yard return.
And then I'm really curious to see how teams are going to approach the returner position itself. That there's some thought that because it is more like a run play, that maybe a bigger, stronger, more physical returner, a guy that can break tackles might be the way to go. Specifically here in Seattle, it seems like they're going to go the other direction. They gave their biggest undrafted free agent bonus to a receiver out of Tennessee, D. Williams. He's certainly more of a home run hitter, quicker type player. They just signed another receiver this week, Marcus Sims, who has extensive experience as a receiver both at West Virginia and in the old USFL and UFL. It's so hard to keep the alphabet soup all together with the spring leagues. Played for the Michigan Panthers. So they seem to be targeting a different style. What did most of the XFL teams do?
It seemed like most of the XFL guys used, obviously their rosters were a little bit more limited. They're not picking from the whole entire universe of players. But I guess if I'm thinking about even in isolation, I would like soft lean towards the kind of running back body just because if you're a real dancer, like the Dante Hall effect that you're going to get once a player made someone miss, there was 4 other guys right in their face right away, really, really quick. So it does feel like I would maybe soft lean towards someone that can you get vertical very, very quickly? Like, can you get to that top speed right away, which I think a lot of these guys can do. And I would agree with the thought that, lean towards that more physical body type just because there's going to be a lot of contact. And to me, it's going to be a lot of these kind of like unsexy 20-yard returns where it's just like get your yards, fall forward. If you can break through an arm tackle, there's going to be 3 other players there kind of quickly because like on the kickoff team, they were able to create layers really quickly. So it wasn't just if you broke one tackle, you were gone. But at the same time, there are a lot of really good kick returners in the NFL and really, really skilled players. So some of those smaller body types, I do think they're going to be able to have success. But when I was looking at it on returners, that when they change directions, like flipping fields all the way to the left, as opposed to just going straight, they were getting like 2 less yards per return. So I do think that maybe quickly we'll see that the people that are just dancing around too much aren't having success. And Dan, I'm more than happy to be like fully wrong about all this and just have the NFL athletes just blow the whole entire thing wide open on both extremes. But it feels like a player that's able to really stay straight, have that vision going down the field, make one move and continue forward is going to have the most success.
And again, we're not, as you mentioned, we're not comparing apples to apples here because we're talking about a minor league essentially versus the greatest football league on the planet. But from the kicking aspect now, the 10 players in front of the kicker that are quote unquote covering the kick, did you notice any differences in the type of personnel teams were using to put up front? Were they going with more of the skill position types that could pursue, or were they tending to lead maybe a little bit more to the physical type of players that can take on blocks and cause problems up front?
Yeah, teams had, different strategies to do it where some teams would get like really heavy bodies in there. Some teams would get really slight bodies in there. And to me, it feels like where the person is positioned amongst the 10 players on the line, that's also kind of an interesting aspect of it where the inside players had, I think I know they had the most, like the 4th spot on the left side, for example, they had the most tackles, but the tackles were pretty spread out in terms of what player on that kickoff team had a tackle. It was pretty spread out. So to me, it'll be like, all right, if you have one really, really good cover person, I would put that player in a spot that's relative to where I'm going to kick the ball. And then in terms of body types, of course, like freak athleticism is always going to be at a premium in the NFL, but I think that players that are those like super, super athletes, but maybe just aren't skilled enough to, really get on that field as a linebacker or really be able to play that kind of second safety spot on a team. Those guys are going to get NFL paychecks and they're going to get more of them and they're going to be in the stat sheet because of this. So to me, it feels like, if I was to pick one position to play every spot, it might be like a running back just because how the blocker kind of or the blocking side has to take on a person that's running at you. And then on the other side, you want to be able to really make one quick move against a blocker and get kind of back down the field. But, like a hybrid safety, I think should be a spot that we should see a lot. But those like big tight ends, some teams use like literal linemen in that spot. And it was just the players were too fast. They were escaping them too quickly to the outside. There was too much room. They weren't able to kind of put him in a phone booth. So it feels like, that edge of the roster, tight end linebacker, but really the kind of safety and running back. And running back certainly a position that feels like consistently devalued in the NFL. Hopefully is able to gain a little bit more value because of this little rule change.
And then the kicker itself I've heard it suggested that if you have a position player that can kick the ball a little bit, that's more experienced in hitting and running and covering, that maybe you use him on kickoffs. How did you see XFL teams with this rule implemented use the kicker in coverage?
Yeah, this is an interesting thought because so the rule is that when the ball is kicked, the kicker can't cross the 50-yard line until the play starts. And so in the XFL kickoffs, there was 14 times where the kicker was the tackler, but that didn't include every time they missed a tackle, every time they were kind of like secondarily involved, or just like their general influence on the play. So there, to me, is absolutely a role for a kicker that is able to tackle. I know that is Jason Myers, like, is he practicing his, is he doing a little bit extra squats? Maybe he has to, because the kicker is absolutely going to be more involved in the play in general. But to me, the ability to kick the ball in the way that you want, I think probably, is more important than just having a position player there. But I think that if you're an edge of the roster player, why not, try and learn how you do it? Because one of the things that I thought going in was I thought it would be really, really important where the ball was kicked. But the end result of the data showed that it really wasn't as important as I thought it would be. I thought, always kick to the corner, make them kind of work in a funky way. But that wasn't the result. So if we're saying, hey, you can kick the ball kind of where you want, then who you have kicking kind of, it matters a little bit less.
Yeah. And obviously the difference then kicks in with the XFL only having the one returner. You do break it down into 5 different zones that teams can target with the kick. Do you think with 2 returners that they'll typically try to target one side or the other, or maybe try to identify which of those returners they view as a little bit more dangerous?
Yeah, I think that is a smart way to do it. But Dan, you can't hold me back from talking about the knuckleball anymore, because I think that it is exactly what you need to do. And so you can decide, hey, like, I am a right-footed kicker. I can kick this specific knuckleball that's going to kind of veer to my left. The return team is right. And if that's the better returner, I think you're going to have to live with that. So that's like the trade-off between, if the kickoff team decides this is exactly what we're going to do, now the return team gets to respond. And look at this. Now we're talking about the back and forth of strategy on a kickoff of all things, the kickoff that I was in your camp too, of like, like, let's just let these guys have the ball at the 25-yard line and get going. But now I think that we're going to see a back and forth, and it sounds like at least 2/3 of the league is interested in doing that.
And you mentioned at the very beginning that it did have a positive impact on injuries, that it did cut down still kind of that perfect compromise of less high-speed collisions, but making the play more dynamic. How many injuries did you see occur in those 407 instances?
It was pretty minimal. And like the rates on the data that they put out were pretty low. I will say that it stuck out to me right away. Like, we both know that the NFL is an injury guaranteed league. It is a car crash after a car crash every single snap. And isn't amazing that players are able to get through it. So I have certainly concerns in the NFL in terms of that, just because whatever the injury data was, I think in the XFL, now you're adding on pounds, you're adding on speed, you're adding on, all those hits that are going to happen. So I do have a bit of concern there. That's why it feels like, all right, we're not going to see, like, JSN's not going to be returning kicks. It makes no sense for him to be doing that. And you're not going to see guys like Tyreek Hill. It is going to be an important play in terms of what the results are. But now it feels like, okay, this can be used as hopefully just more of a proving ground for some of those players that they're just not able to see the field. You're not going to be able to see the field as the like 6th receiver in Seattle. It doesn't make sense. Why would they take all their good guys off the field? But now if you're able to showcase that in a few different ways, that of course comes with the downside of there's going to be some injuries out there.
Something else that stands out to me is if you're making the kick return a viable, significant play, again, a dynamic opportunity for teams more so than it has been in the last few years in the NFL, is you're also increasing the opportunities to get turnovers. What did you see in that area?
So that's a good point that actually I hadn't thought about as much until this week, because I kept thinking about it from, let me just do this knuckleball kick and pin the return team on their side of the field. But I do think we're going to have the possibility of maybe like a huge swing in a big game where a returner can't field the ball, or you have something where the kickoff team is just getting on their returner too fast. So I think there was only one fumble on a return from the whole entire time. But in the NFL, where it really feels like these guys are every year getting better at punching out the ball, if I'm a kickoff team and I can get that ball back in any sort of fashion, where of course, as we said, the surprise onside kick is certainly gone. It looked like in the XFL, it wasn't like happening all that much, but hey, we're going to increase the amount of times that these players are going to get tackled, which means we're going to increase the amount of times that we see players punching at that ball. And Dan, I don't know how any NFL player ever holds on to the ball in general, the way how strong these guys are. So that's certainly going to be a big thing where these return guys, maybe they're not the most secure with the ball. They're speed demons in different ways and trying to, hopefully not carrying the ball like a loaf of bread, but ball security is really going to be king on this play.
What does your gut tell you as far as week one? Do you think teams are going to feel this out a little bit to begin with until they're comfortable with it? Maybe start the season a little bit more leaning towards the conservative approach?
Well, Dan, if kickoffs are boring, it's going to hurt my soul. But I do think that so in the preseason, even before that, I would be surprised if we see anything crazy. Like I as a special teams coordinator, which I am not, I probably wouldn't show all my cards right away in the preseason, but you want to get reps. In week one, I think that we'll probably see like 3 teams try some absolute shenanigans. I feel like that is what some teams that are on the fringe are going to be able to do. I would assume certainly that the majority of people are going to be pretty conservative. But I'm hoping for like at least 5 to 6 of those knuckleball kicks, because these special teams coordinators, they are very smart. And I think that this is the first time that this specific thing is going to be implemented. So they're going to have to try certain things. I think by like week 6, 7, there's going to be more homogeneity, where there's going to be more teams looking around and being like, oh, like this, for example, like the Ravens keep on doing this bouncing kick and it's absolutely killing teams. Now we need to try. And we see that across the league in so many ways, right? Where how many teams have defensive coordinators that were under Mike McDonald or coached with him in some way? It makes sense. Something works in some place and then everyone takes it. I do wonder, is the NFL going to continue with this exact rule in the same way, where I believe this rule is only implemented for 1 year. And if teams are just killing it with this knuckleball and drives are starting at the 10 and there's less points scored, maybe that specific part of the rule is changed a little bit. But I'm hoping, again, I say that it's not just for personal reasons, where I do feel like I have an investment in these kickoffs. I just think it's like, I need to see a team that's trying to scrap, especially those maybe lower tier teams, a team that you're not expecting to win the division, and games that are so close, trying to make a difference.
I have never in my entire life or career heard anybody with such enthusiasm talking about the kicking game before, at least someone that wasn't viably employed as a kicker or as a special teams coach in the NFL. Can we look forward to a weekly update as you chart the trends that you see from this new rule from week 1 through the end of the season?
Dan, I think you're giving me too much work. I feel like I did a lot of work to put into this, and now we're
I feel like you're going to want to do it. I don't think this is going to be work for you at all. You seem pretty jacked up about the whole thing.
Unfortunately, I've been bitten by the bug, and I really think like the excitement is, I just love football so much, Dan. I can't ever hide that. I'm not ever going to hide that. Why would I? And it's like a little rule change that like can really make a difference in games. It was just so wild. Like, we're so used to, like, this college football video game came out, right? And I've been playing it all week. I put this article out. I take a week of vacation so I can play this game. There's so much difference from team to team. In the NFL, as much as I love how much difference there is a lot of sameness. And so for that kind of monotony to be broken up a little bit with a kickoff of all things, I mean, I don't download the special teams film. I'm never watching that. And now I think it'll be fun that we can all track it together. You know, we're all going to learn together, and we're going to learn. Was I a fool for doing this? Was it a stroke of masterwork? Only time will tell.
Well, it's outstanding work. And again, I encourage anyone who's watching or listening to this to go take the article in and absorb it. Here in Seattle, I do feel a little bit of regret that this happened after Pete Carroll moved on as head coach. I think this is the kind of thing that he would absolutely love to have played around with, because he got excited about things like this. I think he might be the only guy that might rival your enthusiasm about the new rule. We won't get to see
imagine Pete Carroll and Bill Belichick. Like, those are literally the guys where I was like, oh man, like, this is the year that we don't have them. Like, they're I'm sure at their respective homes doing very well for the offseason. But
I'm sure Belichick's great. He's probably got a binder about 3 inches thick already created for whatever interviews he goes into next year, trying to get a head coaching job again, about how he'll approach this. You said you took some time off, you got yourself into NCAA 25. What's the next thing you're working on for the site, for Sumer Sports?
Yeah, well, we got some good stuff cooking up for the preseason. We're gonna obviously, we have to preview things. Things are coming back. Our podcasts are getting fired back up, and follow everything. I'm on Twitter at Syed Schemes. Go to SumerSports.com, press refresh a few times. Give my higher ups a reason to keep letting me do some nonsense projects. But I'm excited for the preseason, even if we probably won't see the most exciting kickoffs. Then I think that exciting kickoffs are on the horizon, and maybe I'll have to do a little kickoff corner, Dan. Maybe I'll have to put that in my weekly column this year.
See, you just came up with a name right there. Tremendous work. Thank you for that. Thank you for coming on the show. Really excited about what you're doing there on the website. We'd love to have you back on someday. Again, within the season, maybe take another analytical eye and a look at some things happening specifically with the Seahawks as we get a little bit more familiar with how Mike McDonald and Ryan Grubb, that new staff, goes about doing things here in the Northwest.
Appreciate you, Dan. I was excited to do it because I think there's reason for excitement. I just want to say it firmly, clearly. I'm just so far in on Geno Smith, probably at a too much level. So I think we have some reason for excitement.
Absolutely a reason to have you back on. In fact, I just saw again today. I mean, this has been such a storyline of this offseason to the point that I'm done talking about Geno Smith until the bullets start flying because it's such a polarizing subject. Warren Sharp again today tweets out some analytic stat. It was a completion percentage on balls of 50 plus yards, and Brock Purdy was at the top. And there, once again, is another significant analytical statistic where Geno Smith is near the top and ahead of a bunch of other guys that are considered elite and among the top 10 quarterbacks in the league. And yet some people still refuse to believe in him. So we will have that conversation after we get into the season a little bit. I look forward to that. Shawn, again, thanks for your time, and can't wait to talk to you again.
Appreciate it, Dan.
All right. Again, my apologies for the technical issue there. Hope you enjoyed that. Can't wait to get your feedback on that. What do you think? Are you excited as a fan that the kickoff is presumably going to be a part of the game again? I thought it was cool where he touched on how it may affect fan behavior. As a lifetime season ticket holder and someone who goes to all the home games, it amazes me sometimes how people take their time getting to their seats at the beginning of the game. I'm someone that likes to get there early, likes to avoid the lines. It's something that was embedded in me at a young age, possibly because my father wasn't that way. And we would famously, consistently show up to games late. In fact, you may have heard me mention this in the past, but I was at the Kingdom for Ken Griffey Jr.'s first major league home run on the first pitch he saw in the Kingdom on their first homestand his rookie year. But I was not in the Kingdom to see it because we were walking up the ramp because we were late once again. So I'm always there early in my seat. I want to watch every moment. And I submit that over the years, some of that home field advantage the Seahawks used to so famously have at Lumen Field has waned. And part of it is because the visiting team has a little bit of an advantage early in the game because the Seahawks fans aren't all in their seats. And so the noise level isn't what it was. Well, now the Seahawks are receiving the kick. I know they like to defer a lot. We'll see if that changes at all under Mike McDonald and his staff. But, if there's a possibility of something dynamic happening on the opening kickoff, are you more likely to get there early, maybe get in your seats? Let me know what you think of the rule. Do you think it's going to be much ado about nothing and teams are going to take the safe way out? Or are you excited to see the results? That's going to do it for today. Check out the live show again tomorrow. Watch my Twitter feed at Seahawks Forever for the official start time of that. We'll take questions and answers, comments. Put your questions and comments on the screen as we get into next week in the official full squad start of training camp, where we will get more access to. Some of the reporters that cover the team will get some access as information has come out very lightly from the rookie portion of the workouts this week. Thank you as always for supporting the show. Until next time. Forever and always, go Hawks.